Welcome to Red After Hours. This is r/MaliciousCompliance, where OP's garbage boss tries to throw them under the bus and it blows up completely in their face. Our first Reddit post comes from Charge Infinite 410, titled "No Escalation Needed, You Got It." So I work in HR and an employee called me to raise a serious concern, one that I could not fix due to legal regulations. I explained this and they said they needed the matter escalated to my superior and they were considering legal action if the issue wasn't addressed properly. So I talked to my manager while the employee was still on hold. They said that they couldn't take the call right now, but to escalate it to them via the email thread that this employee had already started. I explained this to the employee and they seemed reasonably happy with this. I sent the email to my manager immediately after getting off the phone. A week later, my manager responds to the email thread with the employee included. Then he @s me and says that they'll handle this from here. However, they never sent another email. They never did anything to help, actually. They just waited a week after it was escalated to them and then immediately sent it back to me. I responded to the email without the employee included and explained the situation again, reminding them why they said that they would be handling it in the first place. They told me that this was in my job description and that I had to handle this now, as they didn't have time to. They also claimed that they never agreed to handle it in the first place. So I handled it. I explained that there was nothing that we could do again and that I couldn't provide them with any further assistance or escalate the case anymore. A few weeks later, we ended up getting a lawsuit, and guess who finally steps in to handle the situation? Well, too late. The CPO and the president were already involved, and I was able to provide supporting documentation showing that my supervisor refused to take over and prevent a potential lawsuit. They didn't fire her, but she was removed from a supervisory position, so I'll call that a win at least. OP, that is exactly why you try to get everything in writing whenever you can, because that manager would have absolutely thrown you straight under the bus if they could. And who knows, since you're not as high up as them, you may have lost your job. So good on you, OP. Keep documenting. Our next Reddit post comes from Snickerdoodle's Rule, titled "Malicious Compliance in Response to Weaponized Incompetence." So this story is when I asked my husband to move money from one shared bank account to our checking account for bills. And you guessed it, he didn't move the money. This was the third time that he, quote, forgot about it, and I was tired of asking. I watched our checking account go into the negatives with overdraft fees. I confronted him and he said that I didn't even tell him which account to pull it from and put it into. But we only have one main account for both of us to pay bills from, so that doesn't even make sense. The account is connected to our freaking debit cards. The next day, he went out to lunch at Chipotle. As he was checking out, he realized that he didn't have cash or money on his debit card. He called me at least 5 times, asking me to transfer money since he knew that I was near the bank that day. Well, I did transfer money, but not to the account with the debit card because he didn't say which account, remember? So, since then, we haven't had any problems with him transferring money into the correct account. You know, I really love these kind of revenge. They're short, they're simple, but they really send a message, and I'm glad that you haven't had any problems since. Sucks, though, that it kind of took embarrassing him in a Chipotle line for him to act right, and he couldn't just act right on his own. But hey, anyway, lesson well learned. About 20 years ago, I used to work as an office assistant at a small company where we would receive orders from clients and then we would assign the work to one of our freelancers who were well compensated and respected professionals. My boss was such a professional herself, and when possible, we would assign that work to her. I accepted the minimum wage job because she told me that I could sometimes get tasks assigned as a freelancer with the nicer freelancer compensation, that she would personally train me, and that in less than a year, I would most likely be promoted to a regular freelancer and make very good money. This sounded like a great career path to my young and naive ears. One of the things that she had told me in the very beginning was that when you take over an order, you become like the project manager for that order. You need to make sure that that freelancer would finish the work on time, as the work was usually time sensitive. Additionally, she loved going on long lectures about how she is paying me, which she was paying me minimum wage, for me to use my brain and figure things out when necessary. These lectures were mainly a vehicle for her to stroke her own ego by explaining to her employees how our brains were not as smart as hers. Well, one day, our biggest corporate client had placed a large order that was due on Monday by noon, and we had assigned the task to my boss to do over the weekend. Well, it was Monday morning, and time was ticking, and my boss hadn't arrived in the office. The client had called to see if we were going to provide the work soon, as this was very urgent. I tried calling my boss, who didn't pick up her mobile phone. I called half an hour later, and I even texted her. No answer or reply while noon was fast approaching. So I called her landline at home. Her husband ended up picking up and told me that she wasn't home, and I explained very briefly why I was trying to get a hold of her. Well, less than an hour before noon, my boss called me furious that I had been so insistent on getting a hold of her and that I had created a state of stress and emergency at her home. Her home number was for emergencies only, and this wasn't an emergency. Quote, "It's not professional to call people when they are not at work." She told me that she got everything under control and she is now sending the work to the client directly. When she arrived at the office, she gave me a big scolding in person and told me that I do not need to hound other freelancers, but not her. It was her business and she got everything handled. She knew all the clients and they were clients because of her. She looked me in the eye and told me if I take over a task, it's not your task anymore. It's my task. You don't need to bother me with reminders. You just give me the instructions from the client and I will handle everything myself. From that point on, if it's my task, your job is done. I never miss deadlines. If the client calls, you tell them that I'm on it and don't call me and don't text me. So I said, fair enough. I apologized for the stress and repeated the new instructions back to her for confirmation. She was very happy with that and confirmed that I had actually understood everything. She once more gave me her favorite lecture about how she is paying me, again, was only paying me minimum wage, for me to use my brain, with a lot of condescending examples of how she always uses her brain, unlike us normal workers. All I could do was nod along as if her narcissistic rant was actually teaching anybody anything. Well, about a month or so later, another client came in with an order, and I accepted it. My boss was available to handle it, so I forwarded everything to her, and I considered my work in regard to that order done, just as she instructed. On the day of the deadline, I was on vacation and was hiking in a remote area with spotty cell coverage. The other office assistant called me and told me that the client had called the office to check if the work was ready. I told my colleague that our boss was on it and that we didn't need to worry as our boss was going to handle it, and that my clear instructions were to tell the client that our boss was personally on it. The task would be done by the deadline and explicitly not to call our boss to remind her of that deadline. Then, since I was on vacation and I needed to conserve my battery and everything at the office was handled, I switched my phone off. An approaching deadline that my boss had to meet was explicitly not an emergency, according to her, remember? Also, I had recently realized that my boss had knowingly misled me about the career opportunities that this job was actually affording me. So I wasn't going to be on call on one of my very rare day offs. While I was hiking without a care in the world, my boss had managed to forget about the deadline. What do you know? By the time she realized that she had missed it, the office was closed. My boss had urgently finished the work, but it turned out that she didn't know the client so well as she didn't have their contact details. As the order was in the office and my phone was off, she had to go there herself, fetch it, and use the contact details to deliver the late work. This was particularly embarrassing as my colleague had informed the client that our boss was personally doing the work for them. When I came back to work, it was sheer pandemonium. She screamed at me, but I just simply pointed out everything that I had done was following her instructions. Why did you do this? You told me to. Why didn't you do that? Well, you told me not to do that. She was fuming, but she knew that I was correct and had acted exactly as she instructed. She also screamed at me for my phone being off, but I said that I needed to conserve my battery for emergencies, and this clearly was not an emergency, and I'm not on call while on vacation anyway. So, malicious compliance for the win, right? Well, as narcissists never seem to accept blame, she had another idea of how to shift the blame to me after all. She said, "But you didn't provide me with the contact details with the order assignment. How could I have delivered them the work? It was your fault for not providing me all of the information." I pointed out that she told me that she knew all of the clients personally, but if she had used her brain, like she constantly tells us to, she could have easily noticed that the order instructions were on the client's letterhead with all of their contact details spelled out perfectly on every single page at the top and the bottom. Now that was a huge slap to her fragile little ego, and remembering her face in that moment still makes me smile. Needless to say, I was fired, and of course, I didn't mind, but don't you just love happy endings? OP, if you ever see this, I hope something bigger and better was waiting for you on the other side of this terrible job. Unfortunately, crappy managers will always find some way to throw you under the bus in one way, shape, or form. So I'm glad, you at least got to expose them a little bit on your way out, but hopefully things worked out for you in the end. That was Reddit After Hours, bringing you r/MaliciousCompliance. Thank you all so much for listening, and if you like these stories, like and subscribe as we post a new Reddit video almost every single day.